Good morning, and I'd like to welcome you all in our today's lecture. Today we will be discussing about translation strategies, and these translation strategies are these models suggested by Vinay and Equivalence, and that's why it is named after them. It's called Vinay and Equivalence model. As you know, as a translator, you have to follow some strategies. Otherwise, there is a chance of mistranslating the text. So knowing the text types and also knowing the languages, the good commander for the languages, both the languages, the target language, also the source language, which is important at the same time, applying different kinds of strategies to perfect your translation, that is also very important. So that's why today we will be talking about Vinay and Equivalence model. So let's see what we have here. Vinay and Equivalence carried out a comparative statistics analysis of French and English. So they took French and English, these two languages, to translate from French to English and English to French. So they made some comparative stylistic analysis. So they looked at text in both languages, noting differences between the languages and identifying different translation strategies and procedures. So they took these two languages, this text of in both languages, in English and French, and they tried to notify differences between these two languages. And also they identify those, the strategies and procedures that will be applicable for both French and English. Okay. And although there is statistic, this is the name of the book in French language, as you can see. It's based solely on French and English. Okay. So it's based on French and English. Its influence has been much wider. So though Vinay and Equivalence actually they form these procedures and also the strategies based on two different languages, that is French and English. But later on, translators on the academicians from different other languages, they also follow the same technique to compare and contrast the target language and the source language. So they actually provided us with a model, and that model can be transformed into different other languages. That means that can be made doable or workable for other languages too. Amongst others, it has formed the basis for a work in the same series of French-German translation. So you can see later on French-German translation. It was also influenced by this French-English translation model of strategies introduced by Vinay and Equivalence. And also different other languages. You can also say English and Spanish translation. So German, Spanish, all these translators from these languages, they also follow this Vinay and Equivalence model. They used it to fix the strategies in their language. Now, the two general translation strategies identified by Vinay and Equivalence are direct translation and oblique translation. So you can get the idea from the very name, direct translation and oblique translation. So which hark back to the literal versus free division indeed. Literal is given by the authors as a synonym for direct translation. So direct translation, we can say that is the literal translation, and oblique translation that goes the free translation that we know so far. Do you get the point? Do you understand what is saying?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So they suggested two different kinds of translation, direct and oblique. Oblique means something which is not transparent or vague, difficult to understand. That is called oblique, but here oblique, it means, the other way of translating. It's not direct or literal. The other way means you will take freedom. Okay. The two strategies comprise 7 procedures, of which direct translation covers 3. So Vinay and Equivalence actually they suggested specifically 2 strategies comprise 7 procedures. So you see 2 strategies, that is direct and also the types, direct and oblique translations, and these direct and oblique translations individually, for direct translation, there are 3 procedures out of 7. And for oblique translation, there are 4 procedures out of 7. So 3 plus 4, it makes 7. Okay? So the first 3, these first 3 are for the direct translation, the procedures. So out of 7 procedures, first 3 procedures are for direct translation. So let's see what are those. Number 1, borrowing. So you can understand it, what is borrowing. Okay? So here it goes. The source language word is transferred directly to the target language. So source language word will be directly transferred to the target language. That means we will keep some of the words that are found in the source language and we will not translate it. Directly, we will use those words in the target language. For example, some words we will keep it as it was in English, and then we'll put it in the Bangla if you want to translate from English to Bangla. Or we can do the other words. That means we can keep some Bangla words while translating it into English text I'm talking about. So when actually we are translating a Bangla text from Bangla to English, then we can keep some words from Bangla and we can put them in the English without translating into English. So for your, if it is important or if there is a necessity that to keep the translation authentic, you may do that. That means borrowing can be applied in that case. So it's a procedure that we can follow, the direct translation. Direct translation means, you will try to keep the source, the target language or target text to the, akin to the source text. That means you will try to keep them parallel. You will try to keep the, you'll try to preserve the source text context, grammatical structures, vocabulary sometimes, not always, some of the problems, words, and some other stylistic features. So you can keep those intact into the, while translating. So you can just transmit those things from source text to the target text. In that case, actually, we need this thing that is borrowing. Otherwise, we can take the liberty and also we can translate all the words into the target language and then we can put it into translation. Otherwise, borrowing is a good thing and we can do it. For example, you see this grouping covers words such as the Russian ruble and Dacia, or more recently, glasnost and perestroika. So that are used in English and other languages to fill a semantic gap in the target language. So just remember, look at the word that is called semantic gap. Do you understand it? What does it mean, semantic gap? Why actually we will borrow the exact words that are found in the source text and we'll keep them, we'll use them in the source language. Why do we do that? Because we want to bridge the gap, semantic gap between the target text and source text. Is it clear? If it is not, then ask me. I'll try to simplify it for you. Is that clear?
Sir, please paraphrase it again.
Okay, no problem. Semantic gap means the gap between the meaning. Okay, it's the meaning. So you see, to keep the meaning intact, so we can use this borrowing. Let me give you an example. You know, if you just go through the Bangla Academy dictionary from English to Bengali, there you will find that some of the words, those are those words are used both in Hindi and in Bangla, occasionally also in Urdu. So those words, for example, you can find that now they are, those words have been incorporated in the dictionary. So now they are regarded as the English word, but they are borrowed from either from Sanskrit, Bangla, or Hindi, or Urdu. Okay? Do you get my point? What I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
While translating, in Bangla, if I find the word mullah, M-U-L-L-A-H, or A. Do you know the meaning of the word mullah?
No, sir.
You haven't heard of this word mullah or maulana? Mullah or maulana. I mean, what kind of words are they? Don't you have these words in Bangla?
Sir, মোল্লা তো
Maulana.
স্যার মানুষের টাইটেল স্যার মানে নামের শেষে
Okay, and what else? We call mullah. Who do we call mullah? আমরা কাদেরকে mullah বলে রাখি?
স্যার মৌলভী টাইপের যারা স্যার
Exactly. That means those who are religious leaders, right? Religious leaders
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
connected or related with the masjid, right? So we call them
Yes, sir.
mullah. And also maulana, same, right? As I was saying, the word mullah and maulana, you see, these are words maybe Persian, and also they're used in Urdu and Bangla and as well as in Hindi. But these words are now available in the dictionary. So instead of translating these words, if we keep those words exactly in the English translation, then that will be borrowed. Okay. So instead of giving the English meaning, we are keeping the words as it is. There is another word for invisible Maya. You know the meaning of the word Maya? M-A-Y-A, Maya. What does it mean in Bangla? How to express it? Maya. You know the meaning of the word, right?
Yes, sir.
In Bengali, and it can be translated into, for example, something which is not real. That is a kind of shadow, or you can say illusion. It's a kind of illusion that is Maya. Okay? So you cannot get the real thing, you just get the Maya. You see, Maya is also can be used directly, you can keep the word. So that will be borrowing from Bangla or Sanskrit. Got it? Now you have got the idea, right? There are lots of other words like this. For example, in Bengali, we have teki. You know the teki?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, we know.
Okay, so instead of translating teki, we can keep it. We can keep it as it is in the translation. So in the English, you can keep the word just like that. So that will be borrowed. Okay. Now there is another kind of borrowing, and it's a spatial kind of borrowing. That is, we call it, you see, calc. C-A-L-Q. What is calc? You see, this is a spatial kind of borrowing where the source language expression or structure is transferred in a literal translation. So it's source language expression and or structure. So here it's not only the word. It's not only the word. Rather, the whole expression and also the structure, even the sentence structure that will be borrowed and that will be used directly in the text, in the target text. So that is called curve. So there, in the borrowing, we have seen that is only one word, single word. When you borrow from another language, that is borrowing. That's one procedure. For the direct translation. And this is another procedure that you can use. This is also borrowing, but it's a special kind of borrowing because you are just copying. Yes, you are just copying, or you can say you're just keeping the authentic or the original expression found in the source language or the structure found in the source language. You are keeping it in the target language, the target text. Here is an example. It's a French calc. You see, it says compliment de la séjour. You see, compliment de la séjour for the English means compliments of the season. This compliment de la séjour, this phrase directly, it has been used in translation. So in that case, that is calc because it's not only one word. It's a whole expression and also the French structure. You see, de la séjour. Can you see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the whole expression and the structure, it has been copied and used in the target. That's why that is called curve. Now, Vinay and Darwin note that both borrowings and curves often become fully integrated into the target language, although sometimes with some semantic change, which can turn them into false words. So sometimes we are using these, these procedures like borrowing and cull. Why are we using this? Because we want to bridge the gap, the semantic gap between the target text and the source text. But what happens sometimes, actually, while doing so, this semantic gap, it's not been bridged. Rather, there is a gap and the change of meaning. And because of these semantic changes, we call them false friends. Because our target or our purpose was to bridge the gap, but that purpose wasn't served by, employing these two different kinds of strategies or procedures, that is borrowing and cull. In that case, we'll call them, that kind of borrowing and cull, we'll call them false friends, because that didn't serve the purpose. The semantic gap still is there. Now, the next. Here you are. Now I have given you the definition of this cull. A cull or loan translation is a word or phrase borrowed from another language by literal, word for word, okay, or word for word translation. You see the phrase, it's not only a single word. If it's a single word, that usually we call it borrowing, but when it is the whole expression and structure of a phrase, we call it calc or calc. See the pronunciation, the phonetic transcription, calc. Okay. Now, in the next slide, I hope you can see it. It says Vinay model. Now, I have given you some example. For example, from French. See, if you put the Adam's apple, the curves, that is pomme d'Adam. So pomme d'Adam, if you keep it in the target text, then that will be calc or calc. Then diff mute, that is a translation in French, that is short mute. So short mute, it means diff mute in English. So if you keep that phrase that's been used in French, if you keep that in the target text, then that will be calc. Then by heart, in French, that is par coeur. That is by heart. So when you keep that French phrase as it is in the target text, then that will be calc. Okay. Then we have free verse. The calc will be verse libre. Verse libre. See, if you keep this verse libre, that phrase in French, if you keep that in English, that will be calc. From Spanish, we can also have this. You see, blue black. Is the calc is, I don't know how to pronounce it, but I can say it in this way, sangrazo, most probably. But the fifth one, I would say that is quinta columna. Quinta columna, that is the Spanish phrase. So if you keep the Spanish phrase in the English text, that will be then killer whale. So we have lots of examples like this. Now the third is tactics. Those were just examples of calcs. Now the third procedure that can be used in the direct translation. This is the third procedure out of 7. That is literal translation. So this is word for word translation, which Vinay and Darwin describe as being most common between languages of the same family and culture. So if they're of the same family and culture, then we can go for the word for word translation. Now, for example, Hindi and Bangla, we have some similarities in syntax and also semantically. We don't have that much gap between these two languages. And in some cases, in common, the words, phrases, diction, they're also similar. So we can find lots of similarities between these two languages. So in this case, actually, you can go for literal translation. On the other hand, German, as a language, and also the Bangla, you see, there are two different languages from two different, you can say, two different branch of languages. They're completely different. Our source is Sanskrit and also different other old scriptures. But on the other hand, German, they have a different kinds of alphabet, they have different kinds of writing system and vocabularies. Almost we are different. These two languages, we don't have that much similarities. So if you actually want to go for word translation from German to Bangla, that will be real challenge, and sometimes that will be completely undoable. That is, you cannot make it workable. And mistranslation, there is a possibility that you will mistranslate the source text into the target text. Okay. So word-for-word translation is possible when the two languages, I mean the target language and the source language, these two languages, when they are similar from the same branches, when they are from the same branch or same origin. Okay, have you got it? What I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
That's correct. Now, which Vinay and Darwin describe as being most common regional languages of the same family and the country. Their example is, I left my spectacles on the table downstairs, which becomes, je laisse mes lunettes sur le tableau bas. That is in French. You can see, I left my spectacles, but it is French start with je laisse mes lunettes sur la table bas. Je means I have. If I go for the word-for-word translation, do you really think that it's going to be the same thing? But they're very close. They're very close. You see, on the table, that is la table means on the, sur means on, la means the, that is the definite article in French language. And tableau means table. You can see the same spelling, but the pronunciation is different. Va means downstairs. Okay. So, and the spectacles, that is the main that is spectacles. And j'ai léger, that means I left. It's in the present perfect. So the literal translation is the author's prescription of for good translation, that is literalness, should only be sacrificed because of the structure and metalinguistic requirements, and only after checking that the meaning is fully preserved. So literal translation is the author's prescription for good translation. That means when actually you have to go for the literal translation of word-for-word translation. What is the case? It says that literalness, that means should only be sacrificed because of the structural and metalinguistic requirements. So you see, the structural and metalinguistic means that is beyond the, that you cannot, go for the, the surface level. In the deeper structure level, when you find the similarities and the structures, only for that actually you can, this literalness, you can sacrifice it. Otherwise, you can just go for the word-for-word translation. And also it says that, and only after checking that the meaning is fully preserved. So if the meaning is fully preserved by this kind of translation, then you can go for word-for-word translation. Otherwise, you can take the liberty. But say Vinay and Darwin, the translator may judge literal translation to be. So to them, that how actually you can judge the literal translation. So literal translation to be unacceptable. Why? Because it gives a different meaning. Sometimes literal translation will give a different meaning, or sometimes has no meaning, or is impossible for structural reasons. It's impossible for structural reasons, then you cannot go for the word-for-word translation, or does not have a corresponding expression within the metalinguistic experience of the target language. So in the target language, when you find that in the deep structure level, if you don't find any corresponding expression, that is the expression which has been used in the target language, the expression that you want to translate it into your own language or the target language, if they are not similar, if there is a gap, then you cannot go for that. And corresponds to something at a different level of language. You see, the Vinay and Darwin, the translator may judge literal translation to be literal. If you have this situation, then actually you can go for the literal translation. That means the metalinguistic experience, if it is same or close to the source text, and also that corresponds to something at a different level of language. And if it corresponds to something different level of language, then sometimes it's challenging because different level of language, different meaning. Then if you go for the literal translation, then the reader or the audience, they might get the wrong perception of the translation or the source text. You see, you have to consider lots of things when you go for the literal translation. Now, in those cases where literal translation is not possible, Vinay and Darwin will say that the strategy of public translation must be used. This covers a further 4 procedures. So we have already talked about the other procedures, the 3 for the, the word-to-word translation or literal translation. Now here we have, after the direct translation, now we have the oblique translation, or we can say the free translation. Now we have 4 different procedures. Number 1 is transposition. this is a change of one part of the speech for another without changing the sense. So transposition can be. Transpose means to, to put something over something else. Okay, let's transpose. একটার উপর আরেকটা আরোপ করা, একটার সাথে আরেকটা মিলিয়ে দেওয়া. That we call transpose. This is a change of one part of the speech for another without changing the sense. So you can, for example, there is a word in the first text that is noun that you can use in the target text if you change it from noun to adjectives. If the word, the meaning of the source text, if it doesn't get changed, or if it is not altered, then you can keep it. You can change it, change the person's speech from noun to adjective or adjective to noun, or from verb to noun or noun to verb. You can keep that. You can take that liberty if the meaning is unchanged. Otherwise, you cannot do that. There are some places where actually transposition can be obligatory. Okay? For example, the Jean lever, it means upon her rising. In a particular past context, it will be translated as soon as she got up. So you see the translation here, it is obligatory. You cannot keep it in as it is. So you need to change it in your own language. For example, from French to upon her rising, if you keep that, then I will not get the concept, or I'll not be able to conceive the meaning of the translation. So in that case, you see, you have to change it as soon as she got up. Okay, so it has been translated into a different way, but the meaning is okay. The meaning is okay. For example, you say upon her rising, there you can say upon, that is the preposition, and her rising, that is the verb that has been used. But as soon as he got up, here you see lots of things have been changed here. Upon, it has become as soon as. Okay. Then we have optional, where actually you can use transposition or not. In the reverse direction, as soon as she got up, could be translated literally as Dokel says leve, or as a transposition in the song there. You see the way actually it's been translated from English to French language, so it has been translated to that way. Just remember, it's obligatory in some cases, you have to change, and sometimes it's optional. You can use it in both ways. If the meaning has not been changed, then you can keep it in that way. Now, Vinay and Darwin sees transposition as probably the most common structural change undertaken by translators. So that is the most common way, that you can take the change, okay, the transposition. That is very common, yeah, obviously. When you translate, you change the structure very frequently, because if you want to keep the structure as it is in the source text, sometimes actually there is a possibility that you will not be able to translate it properly, and the meaning will not be conveyed to the readers. They list at least 10 different categories, such as verb, for example, verb to noun, you can change it, then add verb to verb, you can do it. And then we have, these are two examples from verb to noun, or you can say from verb to verb, so you can change it in this way, as I have given you examples. For example, from verb to noun, noun to verb, and also from verb to adverb to verb, and also you can say adjective. In some cases, you can change. The other thing, that is the fifth one, and for the oblique translation, this is the second one after this transposition, that is modulation. This changes the semantics and point of view of the essay or source language. It can be. So the change of, change of point of views, and also the change of, the semantic change that you would like to bring, that is modulation. Modulation means, in Bengali we call it poriborton. একটা জায়গা আরেকটা আসা, মডুলেশন, উত্থান পতন, এই ধরনের একটা ফ্লাকচুয়েশন. Okay, so the semantics and point of view in these two cases actually you can bring the modulation or change. Sometimes this change is obligatory. You cannot avoid it. You have to make the change. For example, the time when translates as le momento, literal, the momento è. So you see the change. You have to bring the change. That's obligatory. Otherwise, the meaning will be changed. And then optional. The link to preferred structures of the two languages. The link to structures of two languages. For example, the reversal of point of view it is not difficult to show. In French, it has become elle fait ci, though one here. It's very difficult to pronounce. I know a little bit of French. It's not good enough to make you understand, but you can get it. So you see the translation, how it says, it is easy to show. So it is not difficult to show, and it's optional. You can change it. It is easy to show. Can you just take a look at it? You see, it is not difficult to show. That means that's easy. If it is not difficult, what does it mean? If I say something is not difficult, that means it's easy, right? Two
Right,
negatives makes it positive, right?
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
So it is not difficult, that means it is not easy to show. So you see the semantic change, it has been brought here, but totally the meaning of the text, it hasn't been changed. Just only the semantic change in that part, the phase of that particular phrase or expression. Now, modulation is a procedure that is justified in the words of the English edition, when although a literal or even transposed translation results in a grammatically correct utterance, it is considered unsuitable, unidiomatic, or awkward in the target language. So sometimes we consider it that is unsuitable for the target language, that is unidiomatic. It doesn't sound very idiomatic. I mean, the expression that we want to transfer from the source text to target text. So if you go for this kind of modulation, that idiomatic influence or sway or effect that will be lost in translation, and also awkward sometimes. The translation might appear a little bit awkward. So, I mean, if you go for modulation, Vinay and Darwin's model here, you see, we say that Vinay and Darwin's place much store by modulation as the touchstone of a good translator. So you see, where actually you can bring the modulation. If you're a good translator, then you can use this modulation or change of semantic meaning, semantic change that you can bring in the text. Whereas transposition simply shows a very good command of the target language. So transposition actually, you see, it's related to the structure and also the expressions. So, I mean, you just put it there. It's also obligatory and optional. At the same time, if you really go for the modulation, that shows the real shows the real expertise in translation. You are an expert. Otherwise, you will not be able to use these procedures. That we call modulation. For example, in the modulation, you can take it from abstract for concrete, or cause and effect, part for whole for part, and another part is reversal of terms, the negation of opposite that I have already told you that. It wasn't difficult to show, that it was easy to show. Lines, that is negation of opposites. Then active to passive, or passive to active, vice versa. Space for time, time for space. Then rethinking of intervals and limits, that is in a space and time. Then change of symbols. For example, in our language, you have another symbol, and when you want to make it culturally fit for the source target text, then you can change the symbol into the according to the local culture while translating. So modulation is important, and if you don't have a good command over the language, as well as if you don't know the culture and tradition and the context, actually for modulation, you cannot go for that as a translation. It says that it said that the touchstone of a good translator. So a good translator only be able to invest his talent to use modulation while translating text from source text to source language to target language. Now, this category therefore covers a wide range of phenomena. This is also often a process of originally free modulation becoming fixed expression. One example given by the authors, you see, vous l'avez échappé literally means you have escaped beautifully. That means you have had a narrow escape. And these are just examples, just to give you an idea that why actually it covers a wide range of phenomena. That means there are lots of changes that you can bring by employing this very procedure that we call modulation. Because that will give you the liberty. But if you really want to enjoy that liberty of freedom while translating, it must be an expert in it. Then we have the sixth procedure and that is the third one for this oblique translation, that is equivalence. The Vinay and Darwin use this term to refer to cases where languages describe the same situation by different stylistic or structures. We are already familiar with this equivalence and correspondence, so we know that how actually we have to bring this equivalence seen in the translation. So you see, they're also emphasizing on this equivalence procedure. and they refer to the cases where languages describe the same situation by different stylistic or structural means. That means we will use in the target language different stylistic feature, and also the structural means will be different, but you see the language description will remain the same. That means semantically there will be no change, but you can just change the equivalence. I mean, you can just change the stylistic features of the target language in the source text. Equivalence is particularly useful in translating idioms and proverbs. The sense, though not the image of the, you see this is another example, like a dog in a game of skittles can be rendered as like a bull in a china shop. Now, the thing is that that's true when you want to translate idioms and proverbs. For example, an English idiom or an English proverb, if you translate it into in Bangla, and if you translate it into in Bangla in our own way, then sometimes you will find that the charm or the flavor that you can take or that you can feel in the English language, in the source text or source language, will not be able to feel it in the same way in the target language. Do you get me what I'm saying? The English proverbs and English idioms. That means we cannot translate everything that we see. Sometimes you have to keep it as it is. So you have to maintain the equivalence. Otherwise, it will lose the meaning, lose the flavor, or it will lose the flavor. It will lose the charm. Okay, that means you will not feel it when you translate it, the English proverbs into Bangla. So that's why you have to maintain the equivalence, the structural equivalence or the semantic equivalence. You have to maintain some of the stylistic features between English and Bangla. Now the last one, the last procedure, that is adaptation. So this is also a part of these procedures of for the free translation, or you can say the oblique translation. This involves changing the cultural reference when a situation in the source culture does not exist in the target culture. So you see that this involves changing the cultural reference. Cultural reference when a situation in the source culture does not exist in the target culture. So there might be some situations in the target culture, source culture. For example, in the source text, they have mentioned something from the, for example, South American culture, cultural stuffs up there, or essence or elements of it. But you will find that sometimes our readers, if they're not familiar with the South American cultures and traditions, so they will find it very difficult to relate to their schema or their existing knowledge, because they're from a completely different social background. And because of that, they will find it difficult, or it will be a hindrance for the readers to understand the culture which has been translated from the source text into the target text. Understood? Because of the cultural gap, maybe for geographical distance, political reasons, or also for language and traditions. For all this, the cultural gaps will be there. And as a result, it will be, you can go for the adaptation. That means you can customize that cultural situations into your own language for a better understanding of the target readers or the audience. Okay. Now here is an example. For example, Vinay and Darwin suggest that the cultural connotation of a reference to the game of cricket is in an English text might be best translated into French by reference to the Tour de France. So you see, since French people didn't play cricket, so that will be difficult for them to understand. So they could, then in that case, if you know the French, obviously if you're a translator, and if you translate it from English to French, that means you know both the languages. So as a translator, you have to translate it into English. You see the Tour de France. In this way, so that the French readers, they will be able to understand that what cricket is. Otherwise, they will not be able to relate it to their because there is a cultural gap, so they will find it difficult to understand. So in that case, we can go for the adaptation. As you can remember that John Dryden, actually, when he categorized the translation into 3 different groups, we know that there is paraphrase, metaphrase, and also there is imitation. That imitation, we call it adaptation, right? Remember that?
Yes, sir.
So the same thing, the cultural connotation of a reference. So you have to change the cultural connotation from one language to another. So the English cultural connotation of a phenomenon or situation, you have to change it into the Bangla situation so that the Bengali readers, the Bangla readers, they will understand that, I mean that cultural reference. Otherwise, they will find it very difficult to understand since they are not familiar with the cultural traditions or the rites and rituals of the other language. So here we have to go for the imitation, that is adaptation. Okay? Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
We have a few more things, but we don't have time. I will try to complete it in our next lecture. So just remind me before we begin our next lecture. We can say that because it's remained unfinished. So we'll finish it inshallah in our next lecture. Okay?
Okay,
Right?
sir.
So do you have any question? Do you have any question? So if you have any question, I can answer it. I'll try to give you an answer. Any opinion or suggestion? Anything? Anything else?
No, sir.
In that case, if you don't have anything to say, I'd like to thank you for your participation and hope to talk to you in the next lecture, inshallah. Okay. Take care of yourself. Enjoy the rest of the day.